No pressure.
You can
always delete.
Thanks so much.
I did in my head.
Well, it's such a pleasure. Thank you so much for opening your house. It's a pleasure to be here. The title is what?
Baha'u'llah's vision.
Oh, is Vision for Humanity. Oh, yes. I love that title, by the way. It's a great title because it's one of those really broad titles that you can kind of speak about anything, because it's such an all-encompassing topic. And so, but the idea of vision, this last week I had my eyes checked. And I got bad news, which was that I need reading glasses now. I'm at that stage in my life where I'm transitioning to needing reading glasses. And it took me back to when I first needed actual glasses to see far distances. And that was for me when I was in 5th grade. Who has glasses? Who needs or has contact lenses?
5th grade.
So first time you recognize that you needed glasses? About when? 5th grade. So it's the same thing. So how did you realize you needed glasses?
My sister said I couldn't read glasses. So my sister recognized that I needed glasses.
Your sister recognized you need glasses. Yeah. Yeah. For me, it was similar. I was sitting in class and there was a friend in front of me who wore glasses. And I wanted to see what I looked like wearing glasses. And I put the glasses on and then, whoa, you could actually see the chalkboard. There's chalkboards at that time, but you could see the chalkboard. And all of a sudden, when I put the glasses on, I could see things and perceive reality better with them on than when they were off. And it was at that point that I realized I needed to tell my mom, I need to go to the optometrist. And I got the glasses and it was like a fresh lease on life. I mean, when you put those things on and you could finally see the crispness behind things that you had just gotten used to fuzziness, it was such a powerful feeling. And so when we're talking about the vision of Baha'u'llah, it's in a sense kind of a similar process in which we have two visions. We have the vision that we see, and then we have the glasses that Baha'u'llah is offering to us to try on. And the invitation that Baha'u'llah has for us is to just try the glasses on and see if we can see reality better than when we had them on. Do we have that same experience that I had as a 5th grader, or do we have the same experience that someone tells us, hey, you're not seeing things quite right. Maybe there's another way of looking at reality. Maybe there's the need to get glasses and then you can actually see the signs. And then when you allow yourself to get into that state of humility of recognizing, I don't see it perfectly right. And you try something that allows you to be able to see better. That's great. So what Baha'u'llah is offering to humanity is a vision of the way that we see ourselves and the vision that we see other individuals, and to try that on. Because he says most of the world are looking at the world in a blind state. We are blind. In the Bible, it says, Jesus has the same statement where he says that the individuals are blind people leading blind people. If one is blind, they're going to lead the others into the ditch. And so this is the reality of how most people, from the vantage point of Christ or the vantage point of Baha'u'llah, are going through this reality, is that we're seeing things either not at all, we have our eyes closed, or we're seeing things blurry. Christ says that, it says in the Bible, you see things, but you have the opportunity to have new vision, to have a new sight. We see things dimly, he says in the Bible. And the opportunity we have is to see things more clearly. And so this is one of the things that Baha'u'llah offers to humanity, is this different way of looking at the world. And so I think we can see with the events that have happened over the last years, the world isn't quite getting it right. We've got a lot of problems that are happening in the world, and we need to see things in a fresh vision. We need to see things differently. Now, as I was driving up, I was speaking with my father on the phone, and it reminded me of of a few stories that he would tell me. My father loves, my father's background is Iranian, my mother's background is Scottish. And so from the Scottish side, Danish, my mother would teach me Aesop's fables. Do you all know Aesop's fables? So Aesop's fables was what my mom would teach me. My dad would teach me the Persian equivalent, which is, do you know? No? Do you know who's the fables for Persians? No? Mullah Nasruddin. You know Mullah Nasruddin? Yeah, the people in the back know. You know Mullah Nasruddin? Oh, you have to get to know Mullah Nasruddin. So Mullah Nasruddin, not exactly quite sure how to sit in this, by the way. Is this supposed to be like this to the side, or do I? It is? How do kings see? Do they see with this thing in the middle or the side? I'm still trying to figure this thing out. Been avoiding this chair for that reason. But so Mullah Nasruddin is a fable character in Persian culture. And in some occasions, he's incredibly smart. And in some occasions, he's incredibly stupid. And so it just kind of depends on how the story wants to go. And so my father would famously tell me these stories, but he'd never tell me what they meant. And so I grew up, he would constantly tell me these stories, but without the punchline of, what is it he's trying to get across? And so one of the stories he told me, it took me about 30 years to figure out the meaning behind this. He told me the story of how Mullah Nasruddin would go to the market. And he went to the market and he saw that they had grapes there. And so he tied this, tiny grape, and boom, so sweet. It's amazing. So the next week he goes back. There are not grapes there, but there's something larger. There are oranges. And so he tried the orange. It's not as sweet as the grape, but it's really good. So then he goes back. The next week he goes, and there's something bigger. It's a grapefruit. So he tries the grapefruit. Not quite as sweet, but it's bigger, fine. And then finally he goes back the next week, and all they have is an eggplant. That's it. That's where my dad would stop with the stories. And I had no idea what that meant until I had kids myself. And they went from the tiny grapes and they got bigger to the orange, and then they got bigger to the grapefruit, and then finally they became eggplants. And so I called up my dad 30 years later, and I said, I'm the eggplant. And he's like, finally, you get it. So there are a lot of really good Mullah Nasruddin stories, but one of the ones that he told me that I was reminded of on the way out here was one where Mullah Nasruddin was watching someone who was sitting on a branch, and he was trying to saw it. He had a saw in his hand, and he was sawing the branch off. The only problem was that he was sitting on the edge of the branch, and he was cutting the proximal portion, And so Mullah Nasruddin turns to him and he says, you're gonna fall. And the guy who's doing this and cutting it, he says, what are you, a prophet or something? And so Mullah Nasruddin just keeps on walking. And sure enough, as this guy's sawing, eventually it breaks off and he falls. And he runs after Mullah Nasruddin and says, you're a prophet, and follows him the rest of the way. And so there are certain aspects of what we know in this world that can be gained through wisdom, that can be gained through an understanding of the reality of this world. We can start seeing the world in a different way if we have that vision of wisdom, if we have that understanding of how things work. And so the more that we experience things, the more we're able to look back and figure out what is the right way forward. And so the perspective that we get from these series of messengers of God, whether it's Moses or Jesus or Muhammad or the Bab or Baha'u'llah, we believe that these are a series of educators that are coming to humanity who have infinitely more wisdom than we do. And that our role is to, just like, with the glasses, is a recognition of our own humility, a recognition of our own inability to figure things out by ourselves. And here come these individuals who claim to have wisdom. And all that we have to do is try it out, investigate it, see if it's true. And a lot of this just comes from when we look, for example, at the Bible. One of the things that we see is there's a constant admonition in the Bible to look at reality from that standpoint of wisdom, to look at reality from the standpoint of recognizing what's going on. One of the passages I'll just read here is this passage from Jesus where the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the religious leaders, come up to Jesus and say, "Show us a miracle." And he answered and said unto them, "When it is evening, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be foul weather today, for the sky is red and lowering." Does anyone know that expression? There's a red sky at night,
Yeah.
sailor's delight, red sky in the morning, sailor's morning. Why is that the case? Why?
Because the weather moves west to east.
That's right. Weather moves west to east. So you know that if the red sky in the morning, ooh, things are bad coming on, or the good weather's on the other side, bad weather's coming. And if red sky at night, it means it's in the other direction. So that's good weather coming in your direction. So the reality is that you can look at this earth from a standpoint of wisdom. We've experienced how many red nights, how many red mornings. We know what's coming. We know what that cycle looks like. And from that standpoint of wisdom, we understand that what the weather is going to be like. We can actually predict the weather based off of those things. In the same way, there was one time just, it was about a year ago, I remember, I just had this kind of existential moment where we went out to dinner as a family, and it was this red sky and like beautiful sunset. And I just got this feeling of what guarantee do I have that the sun, which is going down, is going to come back up? Have you ever thought about that? I'd never thought about that until that moment. And then I got a little worried, but then I reminded myself of, well, it's always going to happen. That's just the way it works. Why can we be assured of that? Because we've been through thousands of cycles where the same process happens. We're okay with it. The weather today, 100 and how much was it today? 106. We're okay with that because we know that in a few months' time, it is going to get cooler. What guarantee do we have that it's not going to get hotter in a few months from now? We have the guarantee of understanding the cycles, understanding the seasons, understanding how things work. And so therefore we know that after summer comes, what? Not here. There's no fall in California. That's an East Coast thing.
Yeah.
With a wet season.
Indian
Yeah, exactly. We go from a dry season to a wet season out here. But yeah, if we're in the East Coast, we'd have a fall. But so we go through these cycles where we understand things. We gain wisdom behind these things. So the Pharisees and Sadducees understand this passage. They're looking at the world and they're saying, hey, okay, you're claiming to be a messenger of God. You're claiming to be from God. Show us a sign. And Jesus responds to them and say, you can predict the weather based off of how the sky is looking. But he says this, he says, O ye hypocrites, ye can discern the face of the sky, but can ye not discern the signs of the times? It means if they were truly wise and they were able to see the physical seasons change, the physical times change, then they should understand which spiritual season that they are in as well, which is the time of fulfillment. They should be able to recognize. That's what Jesus is saying to these individuals, that we have to become attuned not just to the physical changes in the weather, but also what is the spiritual season that we're in. And if the spiritual season that they were in right then was one where people were divided, where there was uncertainty with what was going on, the Romans were on top of the Jewish people were divided among themselves, there were all kinds of influences coming in, trying to get them to change their identity and beliefs. And there was a general feeling of discontent, of turmoil, of people turning away from religion. All of these things were existing back then. So the reality is that if you can understand what that time is, then you know what the next season is. If we're in the spiritual winter of division and disharmony and discord and fighting and all people turning away from God, what is around the corner? It's the spiritual springtime. So Jesus is saying to them, look, you understand the seasons that are going on, you understand the weather, you have to understand the spiritual seasons that are also happening as well, because these things are repetitive. And one of the beautiful things about the Bible is that there are so many examples of how repetitive history is, of how things, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. That's all I remember from my French. But there's incredible wisdom that comes from this. And so when we look at one of the books of wisdom in the Hebrew Bible, there are books of wisdom. Does anyone know some of those books? One of the books of wisdom.
Exodus.
It's not one of the books of wisdom. That's one of the, what's that?
Solomon.
Solomon, yeah, the song, yeah, exactly. Anything that Solomon said, yeah. The Psalms are another example, the Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. These are the ones that give wisdom. Now, wisdom comes through experience. It comes through looking at multiple periods of time and understanding the patterns that exist within those things. What are the patterns that happen? And this is what he says in Ecclesiastes. You want to read? Okay. How are you with Old English?
Okay.
This is the King's English.
Let's see.
Okay, all right, sounds good. How's your eyesight? It's better than mine. So here. So this is the words of Solomon when he's giving advice. Yeah, let's start there.
From forth away.
Yeah, one generation. We're just gonna keep going.
One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. The sun also ariseth, and the sun goeth down, and hasteth to the place where he arose.
Okay, so we're seeing these, right? One generation cometh, and another one cometh, but the earth stays the same. The sun comes up, the sun comes down, and then it goes to the place it returns, and then comes back up again. We're seeing this idea of cycles. Go ahead.
The wind goeth toward the south, and turneth about unto the north. It whirleth about continually, and the wind returneth again according to his circuits. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Unto the place from whence the rivers come, thither they return again.
Okay, think about that. So the rivers come down the mountain, they go into the sea, then they evaporate into clouds, and then they go back to the mountains and they come back as rain. The cycle that's happening. We understand the cycle that goes on.
All things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun.
Okay, let's read that part again. The thing that
hath been,
the thing that hath been, so we're thinking about the past.
it is that which shall be.
It is that which shall be. It's the same thing, right? It's the same reality, okay?
And that which is done is that which shall be done.
That which shall be done, okay?
And there is no new thing under the sun.
There's no new thing under the sun. It means it all repeats. So one of the ways that we can view history from a spiritual standpoint is that everything is the same. Everything repeats. In the same way Christ was bringing up the same topic. He says you can tell how things change with the sky and what it means and all those things, but you can't tell the spiritual season that we're in. In the same way Solomon is saying here, look at the repetition. Look at how everything changes. There's nothing new under the sun. It stays the same. What we're experiencing now is the same thing that people were experiencing back in the days. It's the same experience, just different seasons that we happen to be in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful wisdom that comes from this, because now what we can start seeing is what are the patterns? What are the spiritual patterns that exist? And what we start seeing is that prophecies in the Bible that talk about the future are actually not talking about one event, but are actually talking about multiple times, multiple experiences. And so I wanted to bring up one example of this. And this comes from a book on traditions related to Prophet Muhammad. So this is from Islamic sources. It talks about what the future is going to look like. Now, one of the things that Christ says about the future, what does he say about his own followers in the future? What does Christ himself say about his future followers? Does anyone know that passage? No? It says, many people in that day, referring to the future, will say unto me, Lord Jesus, have we not done wonderful things in your name? And in your name perform miracles? And he says, I will turn unto them and say, I don't recognize you. So the idea in that is that the future that Christ predicts for his own followers is going to be a community that will call themselves by his name, but he himself is not going to recognize them. Now, could Moses, from a Christian standpoint, have made the same statement? Could Moses have come down from Sinai and said to the Jewish people at that time, many people in the future will call themselves by my name, but I will turn to them and say, I don't recognize. Could Abraham not have said the same thing about his people? They could have said the exact same thing. Why? Because that spiritual history repeats itself. It's the same history. What happens when we are in class? Well, it's been a few years since I've been in a class, but you're probably the closest, or one of the closest people to being in a school. But I remember when I was in school, one of the things that would happen is the teacher, I guess they need to use the restroom or something, they would say, I need to leave.
Mm.
Right? It would happen sometimes?
Yeah.
And what would they tell you?
They say, can you or you can't?
No, so the teacher's wanting to leave,
Yeah.
the teacher's going out. What do they tell the students before they leave?
Oh, behave.
Behave.
Yeah.
Everyone's had this experience. And they say, what's going to happen? They'll be back, right? Like Arnold Schwarzenegger, I'll be back. They're coming back. They're leaving. Behave yourself because I'm coming back. And if you don't behave yourself, what happens? Trouble. Yeah, I don't know what kind of trouble they do nowadays. They can't do that. No, they can't do that nowadays. That's back in my days. Now they can't do that. But what invariably happens when a teacher leaves? Initially, the students are remembering what the teacher said, and then eventually, one person starts whispering to someone else, and then that person starts whispering to someone else, and then they start talking, and then people get up out of their chairs, and all of a sudden, the teacher comes back to chaos, confusion. And then the teacher has to get them back in line, right? The same reality happens for all of the messengers of God. They are our divine teachers. They are like our educators. They come, they put things in order, and then they leave and they say, I'll be back. What happens invariably? There's going to be chaos. There's going to be confusion. Everything's going to be turned on its head. And so we see that. This is why Christ says, in that day, many people will say unto me, Lord, Lord, have we not done these wonderful things in your name? And I will turn to them and say, I don't recognize you. It's because that understanding of human nature is that we are going to forget. And that's going to create chaos. So this is one of the similar passages we see in Islamic scriptures. This is prophecies about the future. And it doesn't sound so futuristic. Men will be devoid of real wisdom. The wise will be few. Fools will dominate and rule the world. I'm not making any political statements. The ones who claim to be wise will be corrupt and tyrannical. Those who are made governors, judges, generals, teachers, and even religious leaders will be ignorant, not worthy of their positions. The lowest among men or among people will be considered highest. Their voices will be heard, and the wise will be silenced. Wow. There's more. The deeds of the tyrants with power will be considered as right, and the innocent tyrannized as wrong. No one will trust anyone, as there will be none to trust. The ones who tell the truth will be ostracized and condemned. The gentle and the kind will be considered fools. The tyrants will be rewarded, and rights will only be had through bribery. Any children in the room? Children will revolt against their parents.
No, impossible.
Impossible. Sanity will be lost through intoxication. Adultery and promiscuity will be prevalent. Murder, treachery, and thievery will become common and multiply. Decency and morality will be considered to be abnormal and comical. Sinning will be the common way of life.
Sinning will be the common what?
Sinning will be the common way of life. Leaders among men will lead them astray. Feelings of love and compassion will be lost forever. Now imagine this. This is coming from Muhammad. He said, Islam will be only a name. and the Quran only writing on paper. The spirit will be lost. So it's the same. You can see how this prophecy here, Jesus made a very similar prophecy. There are similar prophecies throughout the Hebrew Bible. Why? Because it doesn't just represent one generation, but it represents the generation of all peoples right before the divine guidance comes. It's the season that we have to be waiting for. So if we look at the world today, and Jesus was with us, and he said, what are the times that we live in? That's one of the questions we have to ask ourselves. Are we living in the spiritual springtime? Are we living in the summertime? Are we living in the fall? Or are we living in the winter? Where are we at right now? And if we recognize that we're living in the winter, which anyone who turns the news on for a few minutes will see, that we're living in one of the darkest, if not the darkest times in all of human civilization, we'll recognize that we are in the precipice between the winter and the spring. We're right at that point where we have to recognize the signs of the times that we live in. Any questions on that so far? Amen. I like it. I like the amen. Okay.
This was Hadith.
Yes. So I thought we could look at a few passages of Baha'u'llah. Before I did so, I was just starting to read this book. This is a very interesting book. It's called The End of Everything. It's a pretty dark book, but it says it's about how wars descend into annihilation. It's written by this pretty astounding historian who's at Stanford, but I just got through the first 2 chapters, so I don't have a lot of wisdom to bestow from this, but he's looking back at history. And the reason that history, I think, is such an important topic is because of what we've just said. History repeats itself. If we really want to understand where we are right now, what does it look like? What's happening in the world today? We just have to look backwards and see where are we at in that cycle. And the more we understand where we're at in the cycle, the more we understand what the reality is of this day. And one of the things that he says in here, he says, this book makes clear, however, that there is no certainty that as scientific progress accelerates and leisure increases, and as the world shrinks on our computer and television screens, there is any corresponding advance in wisdom or morality, much less radical improvement in innate nature. So the thing that he's warning against is, look, we've gone through these cycles of annihilation in the past, where people have been confident that everything's going to be okay, that we're fine, we're going to figure it out, we're not going to make the same mistakes, we're okay. And the point that he makes is that time and time and time again throughout history, we've all come to that same conclusion, and that's been on the precipice of being annihilated as a civilization. And so he's warning about that. He's looking at the history and saying that. He says, even as humanity supposedly becomes more uniform and interconnected, we are more interconnected now than ever before, so too our world grows increasingly vulnerable and dangerous. So as we're developing our technology, we're not necessarily keeping up with it morally. We're not coming up with an increase in our compassion, an increase in our kindness. It's not keeping pace with the technological advances. He says, as the margins of human error and misapprehension in conflict shrink, from Ukraine to Taiwan to the Middle East, he says, we should remember that the world wars of the last century likely took more life than all armed conflicts combined since the dawn of Western civilization 2,500 years prior. So the amount of killing we've done in the last 100 years has been greater than the amount of killing done over the 2,500 years. Why? Because we're having more technology. And so this is the reason why Baha'u'llah has come at this particular time to give us this message, to give us this alternative vision for how we can see the world, which is a world radically different from how it currently views itself right now. A world that's a vision that changes the perception of how we view ourselves in relation to our own reality, but also how we view one another. And that reality needs to change. And if we don't change that, there's going to be consequences to that. It's like the person who's cutting the branch off, you know, there's going to be disaster that's coming about. It's not necessarily just a prophecy that's out there. It comes from wisdom. It comes from an understanding of history and how we've done things. All right, how long does this thing go, by the way? I should have asked that.
Who wrote that book you just read?
This one, a guy called Victor Henson. Okay, so first quote we're going to read. I like because of the analogy that Baha'u'llah uses. Who would like to read this one? Good job reading Old English, by the way.
Thank you.
Who would like to read this one?
I'd say yes, but I don't have glasses.
Okay, I'm going to go back to you. Yes.
Which one?
One of these. So this is from the writings of Baha'u'llah.
The all-knowing physician hath his finger on the pulse of man. He perceiveth the disease and prescribeth in his unerring wisdom the remedy. Every age hath its own prophet, and every soul its particular aspiration. The remedy the world needeth in its present day affliction can never be the same as that which a subsequent age may require. Be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age you live in, and center your deliberations on its exigencies and requirements.
Okay, so let's stop there. So the analogy that we're using here, or Baha'u'llah is using here, is that God is known as what? What's the all-knowing physician who has his fingers on the pulse of humankind. He perceiveth what the illness is, and then he prescribes the remedy. So if you think about it in terms of cycles, what are the cycles that humans go through with regard to health? Health, then illness, then health and illness, and health and illness. And we go back and forth between those. And sometimes it stays in illness for a long period of time. But in general, the cycles are that. And if we look at it, at humanity from this perspective, that humanity is going through spiritual illnesses over time. Who is the divine physician? It's those messengers of God that come, that provide that unity, that provide that reminder to go back to the spiritual essence of what faith is about, right? So Baha'u'llah is saying that yes, every cycle has its illness, but the illnesses also have their unique flavors to them. You can't take the same illness or different illnesses and give the same remedy. There's no like magic pill that you just say, oh yeah, you take the sick pill and you'll feel better. You have to be able to figure out what is that particular illness, and then you give the remedy according to that particular illness that that person is suffering from. And so taking old pills is not necessarily the way to getting whole. In fact, sometimes, if you've got a prescription bottle and it's a little like way beyond expiration, what used to be something that would make you feel better can actually make you pretty sick. I took my kids to Scotland this last year, and we went and visited, we went to England for a little while as well, and got to visit my uncle. And my uncle was living in Leicester in England, but he had come down to London to visit us, and his sister-in-law had a flat, which is what they call apartments in Britain, but they had a flat where we got to hang out there. And one of the things my kids really wanted to try was fish and chips. Has everyone had British fish and chips? Very different from American fish and chips. You have to have British fish and chips. So we went and we got British fish and chips. And my aunt said to me, don't worry about the ketchup. We've got tons of ketchup at home. So we went, we picked up the fish and chips, we brought it home. We unpacked all the fish and chips, and sure enough, there's this big bowl of ketchup. And I opened the ketchup up and I squeeze it on my plate, and it came out black. And so I hadn't been to Britain for a while. I don't remember what the color of ketchup is in Britain, but I figured America probably had coloring and everything. And this is more natural. And I told my kids, just eat it. Like,
They
this
add
is-
botulism to it.
That's it. I was like, just eat it. It's good. This is how they make ketchup in Britain, I said, it's just, you know, a darker color. Don't worry about it. And so I tasted, my kids tasted it. I just look at my kids as I'm tasting it myself, and I realize this is this is bad ketchup. This is ketchup gone bad. We end up looking at the expiration date. The expiration date was from 2012.
Oh my god.
So ketchup, I found out, does expire. If it looks black, that's not British ketchup. It's just bad ketchup. My kids didn't forgive me for claiming this is just how British people do it. But the point is that the point is that in the same way, ketchup from 2012, if I squeeze it out, would have tasted pretty good. It would have felt good, or I don't know how nutritious it would be, but it would have tasted good. But the fact that you were having it when it's expired can have the opposite effect. It can take something that tastes good and make it taste bad. It can make me feel, and we all did, we felt really ill that night. It can make you feel ill. The same way with prescriptions. If we're taking the prescriptions of 2,000 years ago for the illness that affected the Middle East 2,000 years ago, and we try taking it today, don't be surprised if maybe the medication has expired. Not because it wasn't efficacious, it was absolutely efficacious 2,000 years ago. But what's changed? The illness has changed. Now we're dealing with a different illness. It's nothing about the original prescriber of that. That prescriber was divinely inspired. That was a divine prescription that was given by the all-knowing physician. But what's changed? We've changed. We now need to get the updated medication to be able to deal with the illnesses that affect us. So this is why I believe Baha'u'llah is saying here that the remedy needs to change. You need the updated version of it, right? It's like the iPhone updates. You need to have some kind of fresh update that goes, not the Microsoft update, that's dangerous.
If you see an update request, say no.
Yeah, the hospital crashed last night. It was bad. It was a bad situation. Yeah, it was, not a, fortunately I was fast asleep, but the residents who were there had to deal with all the ramifications of the computers going down. I'm glad they told me about it in the morning. Wake me up. So let's keep reading this.
We can well perceive how the whole human race is encompassed with incalculable afflictions.
So look at the vision that Baha'u'llah is offering. This is in the middle 1800s. And Baha'u'llah is saying we can well perceive that
The whole human race is encompassed with incalculable afflictions.
this is what Baha'u'llah is perceiving, saying, watch out. The illness is setting in. We have a problem in the world. Not a lot of people would have recognized that at that time. The kings and rulers and everything, they felt like they were doing fine and everything had continued the way it had been for a long time. There was that hubris that we talked about, that feeling that everything's okay. They didn't realize that the world was going to be turned upside down, that everything is going to be reordered.
We see it languishing on its bed of sickness, sore tried and disillusioned. They that are intoxicated by self-conceit have interposed themselves between it and the divine and infallible physician.
Okay, so what does that mean? Read that part one more time.
We see it languishing on its bed of sickness, sore tried and disillusioned. They that are intoxicated by self-conceit have interposed themselves between it and the divine and infallible physician.
What does that mean?
Clergy, the rulers.
Yeah, so people have interposed themselves between the sick patient and the physician. And they're offering all these kinds of remedies. And they're saying, oh, this is what we need, what do we need to do? We actually need to find out who the real physician is. That's the important part. Rather than just saying, okay, we'll take whatever people say is the thing that we need to do. We actually need to say, what are your credentials? Where is your certificate that you passed medical school? Where is this? Where's your history of which people have you cured? You know, what illnesses have we affected to change it? Where's your Yelp rating, right? Where are those things? So this is what, you know, Baha'u'llah is saying, is that this world that we're living in is sick, it's getting sicker, and that rather than seeking the help from the divine physician, which is what Baha'u'llah is offering, which is the same physician, the same source as the physician that came in the time of Jesus, in the time of Moses, in the time of Muhammad. That physician has come back again today. But instead of humanity turning in the direction and saying, thanks for coming, we really appreciate it. What's going on in the world? How do we fix this thing? Instead, we're going to a bunch of people who are quacks, a bunch of individuals who pretend like they know what they're doing, but they don't have the credentials to back it up. And what happens? We take their medications and we're getting sicker and sicker. And that's the world that we're living in.
The names are Napoleon.
What's that?
Their names are Napoleon.
Yeah, there's a lot of names out there. Yeah, absolutely.
The politicians and the worldly wise, the
Yeah.
priests
And the philosophers and the teachers and the professors and the this and the that. Yes, there's a lot of people interposing themselves. Okay.
Witness how they have entangled all men, themselves included, in the mesh of their devices. They can neither discover the cause of the disease, nor have they any knowledge of the remedy. They have conceived the straight to be crooked, and have imagined their friend.
So think about this. Remember what Christ says. He refers to the religious leaders living at his time as the blind leading the blind. It's the same thing that Baha'u'llah is saying. It's the same exact situation that Baha'u'llah is coming to, that Christ came to, which is people pretending to be guides, but they're blind themselves. And Baha'u'llah is saying the same thing is happening in this day and age. We need to be aware of the time that we live in.
Incline your ears to the sweet melody of this prison. Arise and lift up your voices.
He refers to himself as a prisoner. Why does he refer to himself as a prisoner?
Baha'u'llah suffered many years in prison
Yeah.
for the propagation of his faith.
That's right. Baha'u'llah, because he claimed to have a message from God, lived a life of imprisonment. There was a chain that was put around his neck that weighed 110 pounds. That's how heavy it was. And so Baha'u'llah lived his life as a prisoner, which is the way that when you look at history, has that repeated itself? What does Christ say? A prophet is not without honor. We need to do Bible classes.
Oops, not us.
A prophet is not without honor, save in his own country. It means every single prophet, and this is one of the things it says in the Quran as well. Every prophet that has come has always been rejected. So if you want to see one of the proofs that someone is from God, if they've been rejected by most of humanity, that's a check. There's something you can look at and say, okay, they've checked that box. Okay, they might be the one. If they lived a life of luxury and everything's fine and people are following them, that's a little suspicious, because that's not the way that things have happened in the past. We look at the wisdom, every individual who has spoken truth has been rejected, this divine truth.
Arise and lift up your voices, that happy they that are fast asleep may be awake.
Happily. What does happily mean? What does happily mean?
Ignorance.
Huh?
Ignorance.
Happily?
Yeah, well, I mean, happily, you're not aware.
Ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
So happily there's two different types of happily. It's Happily, which could mean that. This is, how do you spell this one?
Happly.
Happly. Happily, which is different from happily. What does happily mean? Hopefully. Yes, inshallah. Yeah, exactly. It means hopefully. Okay.
So read that.
So let's read this. Hopefully.
Arise and lift up your voices, that haply they that are fast asleep may be awake. Say, O ye who are as dead, the hand of divine bounty proffered unto you the water of life. Hasten and drink your fill. Whoso hath been reborn in this day shall never die. Whoso remaineth dead shall never live.
Now, if someone has read the Bible or is familiar with the Bible, this should be vibrating with what Baha'u'llah is saying. It should be resonating. Just like when you were playing what was that? You're a particular thing and you were playing it. What was that? String?
Harmonic?
Yeah, the harmonic.
Yeah.
Yeah, do that. Yeah, play that harmonic. There you go. So everything vibrates. Why? Because he's hit a particular note that causes everything to resonate with that. So that note stays there for a longer period of time because it resonates. In the same way, for someone familiar with the Bible or the Quran, whether you're Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Baha'u'llah's writings vibrate within you because it's the same source. There is a good friend of mine in Sacramento who comes from a very, very strong Christian background. He actually spent years living in a Christian commune. He would go into the streets of San Francisco and he would, be in the corner with the Bible and all. That's what he did. And so he knew the Bible backwards and forwards. He came to a Baha'i devotional gathering because one of his friends was a Baha'i and his friend's mother had passed away. So they were having a devotional gathering and he thought it was a respectful thing to do. And so he sat there, and when he heard the words of Baha'u'llah through one of the prayers, he instantly recognized that that voice is the same voice that we're speaking in the Bible. And he became a Baha'i because he recognized that reverberation that he heard in the Bible was the same words that were being uttered in this day by Baha'u'llah. So these passages here, this passage right here, where he's saying that, let's read this one again. This is a beautiful passage.
Incline your ears to the sweet melody of this prison. Arise and lift up your voices, that happily they that are fast asleep may be awakened. Those
that are fast asleep may be awakened. What does Christ say in the Bible that we have to be? We have to be awake. I don't know if you've seen the Seventh-day Adventist booklet. What's it called?
Awake.
Awake. Yeah, Jehovah's Witness. It says awake on it. That's the name of the magazine. It's called Awake. Why is it called Awake? Because Christ says you need to be awake. So you can say to someone, hey, why are you falling asleep? Christ said, be awake. But the understanding of it is that they're spiritually asleep. There's going to be this time that's going to happen when a lot of the world is going to be spiritually fallen asleep. Sounds like today, if you ask me. But there's this opportunity that Baha'u'llah is giving us where he's saying, I want you to become awake. Lift up your voices. Talk about the greatness of this day. Talk about the fact that God again has spoken to the world to provide this remedy. Hopefully, it will take people who are asleep and make them awake. Take people who are spiritually dead and make them spiritually alive. Right? So this is the point of what Baha'u'llah is offering to humanity, is this idea of spiritual salvation, not as a personal salvation, but as a salvation for all of humanity, a salvation for us to be able to take this unity that Baha'u'llah's vision of unity that Baha'u'llah is offering for this world, to reacquaint ourselves with what Jesus spoke about, what Moses spoke about, what Muhammad spoke about, but take that remedy and package it in the pill that's effective for this day and age. And the main problem that we can see if we're looking at all of the issues that are affecting the world, the common thread to all of the issues that are affecting the world is disunity. And so this is why Baha'u'llah makes it the watchword of his revelation, is this point of unity. We need to be unified. To see the whole human world as one. To not be centering our thoughts and attentions on our own self or our country, but seeing it as a world-embracing vision. To eliminate all forms of prejudice. To bring about the equality of women and men. To uplift individuals. To take the extremes of poverty and raise people up from that. To be able to take people who are in one state and transform them into another state. This is the thing that's beautiful about the faith of Baha'u'llah, but the faith of any messenger of God, is that they have the ability to be able to take an individual and transform them. What Baha'u'llah is looking for is not individuals who are like-minded individuals and say, hey, let's get together and form a club. That's not the vision that Baha'u'llah is offering. Baha'u'llah is offering a vision where he's looking to transform individuals, to transform the world, to take people and change their vision so that they see the world in a different way than they saw it before. I had one example of that when I was in college. There was a guy who became a Baha'i in college. He was an individual who came from a very strong Christian background. But he was one of those like strong Sunday Christians, right? Like on Sunday, he was very committed. Saturday night was very different when it was frat night. Like he had a very different experience, but he was very committed on Sunday. But he was also very curious. He was an individual who liked to look into things. And so when his uncle told him about this new religion that he'd found out about called the Baha'i faith, this guy decided, well, I'm going to investigate this. I'm going to look into it. And so I went to Vanderbilt. He went to the Vanderbilt library to see if there were any books on the Baha'i faith. And sure enough, there were a lot of books on the Baha'i faith that were there. And he checked out, the first book he checked out was actually this one, Gleanings from the Writings of Baha'u'llah. And so he checked it out and he read it within a few days. Then he went back to the library and he checked out the next book, which was Tablets of Baha'u'llah. He read that cover to cover. Then he went back and read the Hidden Words, Seven Valley. He read all of the writings of Baha'u'llah that were translated into English. Then he went and read all of the writings of Abdul Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah. And then he read all of the writings of Shoghi without meeting a single Baha'i, because he didn't want to meet anyone that would influence him in this process. And at the end of it, he was sitting in his dorm and realized he can't be a Christian and not recognize the faith of Baha'u'llah. But he also understood, and this was the thing that was hard for him, was the gravity of putting on these new glasses and seeing differently required him to act differently in the world. And he didn't know if he was quite ready for that. So he decided that he would have one more night of partying. He went out, he got hammered, he had a great time. And then at 4 o'clock in the morning, in his hungover state, he ended up signing his declaration card that he was going to become a Baha'i. And I got to meet this guy, really interesting guy. But man, to see the transformation between who he was before and who he became after is astounding, because he completely changed his orientation. He was a guy from Knoxville, Tennessee, who had never had a friend who was not white, who all of a sudden he joined the Black Student Alliance at Vanderbilt University. And he said, hey, Ghaneh, you need to come with me. Baha'is need to be involved. It's nerve-wracking. But we went. He said we need to be more involved in the women's rights organizations at Vanderbilt University. So we ended up in getting ourselves involved in that as well. And so just seeing his transformation, he went from someone who was a real big party goer to someone who was encouraging his friends to think about maybe staying off of alcohol. You know, this is the transformation that happened. Why? Because he recognized the vision that Baha'u'llah had was different from the vision that he had before, but was a way to be able to see reality in a much more perfect form. And this required him to sacrifice part of who he was. So, you know, he became a different person. This is why in the Bible, you'll see that they oftentimes have different names. There's their name that they had before they recognized Jesus, and there's the name they had after they recognized him. Simon becomes Peter, right? Saul becomes Paul. They changed their names. Some of the early Baha'is got new names. The Bab renamed individuals different names. Why? It's not because the old names were bad, because it was a reflection of the fact that faith, when it enters into your heart, has the ability to profoundly change the reality of who we are. And so the vision that Baha'u'llah has for humanity is not necessarily to take a bunch of goody two-shoes and put them together and get them all together and come up with this thing, but it's actually to take individuals, expose them to the beauty of the vision of Baha'u'llah, and to hope that transformation within. I think I will end there.
You want to get tired because you're right. Let's see some.
Any thoughts or questions? I'll share this with you afterwards. Right here, yeah. Yeah.
I like the transformation that happened to me from having Christian glasses
Yeah.
to when I found the faith, and it was more than not partying or whatever. That was something super small, but
Yeah.
the amount of love I had, to see other human beings through these glasses that would just, with the vision of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha, it just changed my whole world.
Yeah.
That I didn't need to save anyone. I don't know, I can't explain it, but when you talk about that, it resonates with me because that's the gift that the Baha'i faith gave me is, with those glasses, it's a sincere form of love and care for every human being because we're all one.
Right.
Like we're part of each other.
Yeah.
People from other countries, just the whole vision is so much bigger and more beautiful. And it's not like I go around like, oh, I'm just this loving person. It just feels so good to have that vision everywhere I go. It's just such a better way to be in the world.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm explaining.
No,
It's not like I'm setting myself up. It's just to see that he's told us. That
Yeah. Yeah, my mother is Scottish. She encountered the Baha'i faith when she was in high school. Her father is a minister in the church in Scotland, and it was the Free Presbyterian Church, which, if anyone knows the Free Presbyterian Church in Scotland, it's not very free. You're not allowed to celebrate your birthday. You're not allowed to, like, it's a pretty, when you think of Scottish people, that's the right religion for Scottish people. It's very fire and brimstone type existence. But my mother grew up loving the Bible and loving Christ, but having a hard time understanding how that fit into a global experience that was starting to affect the world. That, yes, it made sense in her reality, but now that we're getting all these other, interactions with people from different parts of the world, how did that make sense in that setting? And so when my mother found out about the Baha'i faith from one of her friends in high school, she used to sneak out of the house and go to gatherings such as this, as fireside. And she found out that the Baha'i faith's view of Christianity is one that embraced it in the same way that Christianity embraces Judaism. It's part of the same faith. You can't separate the two.
Yeah.
It's our faith. It's our identity. It's the source, it's the parent religion of the faith of Baha'u'llah. And so, but what she understood from that was that it expanded her vision, that she was able to see dimly, as it says in the Bible, and then she was able to see clearly, face to face. She was able to have a better understanding of it. She was able to understand that when Christ says that this is the light, referring to Christ, that hath lit the path of every person that has walked into this world, as it says in the book of John, she was able to now understand through the illumination of Baha'u'llah, this understanding of the oneness of religion, that all the sources of the major religions that are out there come from that same source, come from that same God. We call it by different names, but that reality, that divine principle of that school is one and the same. That the teachers may be different, but that educational system is one and the same. So she was able to take that and see a broader vision. She was able to have an increased understanding of the place of Christ within this whole scheme of things. And it was able to make her able to increase her love for Jesus and give her a fuller apprehension and understanding of it. And really, that's the purpose of the faith of Baha'u'llah. Shoghi Effendi explains, he says, the primary purpose of the faith of Baha'u'llah is to take the people of these different religious backgrounds and give them a better understanding of the religion with which they stand identified.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it made me love Jesus even more.
That's right.
Then I got to also love Muhammad and
Right.
Moses, and it all made sense.
And you're able to see how they're all intricately interwoven into one full plan for humanity, one divine revelation throughout time that's been progressively given to humanity throughout time, and it all starts to make sense. You all of a sudden like get this incredible epiphany of how everything works in the world from a spiritual standpoint and how we can draw from these different experiences. And so that's a very powerful way in which we can expand our consciousness, because now all of a sudden, imagine that same effect happens in the world on a global sense. And now imagine people in the different areas of conflict where religion has become a source of contention, that the people are now imbued with this understanding of how we truly are part of the same religion. Baha'u'llah says, consort with the followers of all religions in a spirit of friendliness and fellowship. It is a religious obligation of Baha'is to become friends with people of different religions. Where has that ever been stated before? It's a religious imperative to become friends with people of different religions. I got a friend from medical school who called me up a few years ago. This guy is amazing. He has a photographic memory. I don't know if you've ever met someone who's had a photographic memory, but they're really annoying to be friends with, especially when you're studying in medical school together. Because we would come out from an exam, he'd be like, "Hey, what'd you get for question number 57?" I'm like, "What was question? I don't even remember. I can't recall even one question from that exam." But he was able to recall the entire examination, all the questions, answers. Like, he was a brilliant individual. Comes from a very strong Jewish background. And he called me up and he said, "I think I'm going to go down as one of the greatest teachers of the Baha'i faith in the history of the Baha'i faith." I said, "How so?" He said, "Well," he's living in Chicago right now. He said, "I don't know why, but every single conversation that I've been having recently has been telling people about the Baha'i faith." And I said, "Like what?" He said, "Well, just today I was on a bus and this person started talking with me, and then they asked if I was Jewish. And I said, kind of." And he said, "Well, what do you mean, kind of?" He said, "Well, I've seen that the more Jewish people become, the more they can sometimes separate themselves from other people." This was his experience as someone who is a strong Jew himself. He said that if you become too Jewish, you end up isolating yourself from other individuals. And he said the same is true of every religion. He says if you become too Christian, you see people as saved versus damned. And it just alters the relationship. If people become too Muslim, they become seeing people as, in the same sense, they have the kafir, right? Like, is that the term? Yeah, that someone's either a believer or not. And so then they create this separation. And they said, but the one religion out there that doesn't do that is the Baha'i faith. He said the one thing, like, if people become really Baha'i, they really get more and more unified with other people, because that's part of the faith, is actually to become friends with other individuals. And he said, and then this person asked me, "Well, tell me more about the Baha'i faith." And then now I have to look up more about it, and I explained what I could, but then they asked a bunch of questions I didn't know the answer to. So I was hoping you could help me with knowing how to answer that in the future. You know, this is an individual who, again, feels this ability of the faith of Baha'u'llah to transform individuals and transform society in a way that's desperately needed in this world. He's recognized the fact that the glasses that Baha'u'llah is offering of this oneness of religion, this vision of the oneness of religion, is a healthy view, is something that we desperately need in the world today. It's not something that takes us away from a religion. It actually allows us to become more fully invested with the religion itself. I'll end with a story. That's okay. I like stories. There's a story of Abdul Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah. And this is in the first decades of the 1900s. It's somewhere between 1900 and 1910. But there's a drought that is going on in Africa. He lived in Africa for a while. And so there is this incredible drought that had happened. Israel, similar to California, has the wet season and the dry season. And the wet season had begun not wet at all and had been completely dry, and the crops were not doing well. And so there was a lot of angst and concern among the inhabitants of Akka. Now, Haifa and Akka are somewhat unique in Israel because it's a congregation of Jewish people, Christians, and Muslims were living there. And actually in relative harmony in that part. A lot of it due to the influence that Abdu'l-Baha had. And one story which kind of illustrates it is this time of the drought that was going on. So this drought was happening, and the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims decided that they prayed a lot, but they needed to have 3 solid days of prayer. And so the Jews were going to pray on Friday. The Muslims were going to pray on Friday, the Jews were going to pray on Saturday, and the Christians were going to pray on Sunday. That's how it was going to be for the drought to break. They were going to pray for it. And so those 3 days of praying happened and nothing happened. There was no end to the drought. And so they came to Abdu'l-Baha to ask for advice. They said, why is it that our prayers didn't work? And Abdu'l-Baha said, the Mufti, who was the head of the Muslims in Akka, he says, the Mufti in Akka, his daughter has just passed away. And he says, and God listens to the prayers of those who are suffering the most. And if you want effective prayers, you need to go to the Mufti and you need to ask him to pray in his sadness and in his desperation, because his prayers will work. And so they all went over to the Mufti's house, and including Abdu'l-Baha, and the different religions went up to the Mufti and were begging him to pray for the end of the drought. And eventually the Mufti agreed and he said, okay, let me go to this other room and say prayers for the drought to end. And as the Mufti was in the other room, Abdu'l-Baha started serving tea to the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims. And he said to them, do you want to know why your prayers didn't work? And he said, yes. And Abdu'l-Baha said, the reason your prayers didn't work was because God didn't want to have to decide whether to send rain on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, because you were looking to have your particular prayers be seen as the ones that were going to be successful. And so therefore, God didn't answer any of yours. He said, however, if you had come together and said prayers unified, all on one day, he said, God would have answered. And as Abdu'l-Baha was saying this, the winds shifted outside, the clouds started forming, and then as the people left, the rain started pouring. And it actually poured so much that there was a massive flood. So they ended up having to go to the Mufti and asking him to calm down on his prayers a little. But I think it speaks to the importance of, the vision that Baha'u'llah has. It's not that we take these different religions and try to cram them together. Is to actually see the unity underlying the faith of God, to see that oneness. That's the vision that's one of the visions that Baha'u'llah got. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Can I end this? Okay.